Well, you've heard plenty of ghost stories and myths in the past, haven't you? Of course you have. But have you survived an urban legend? Or worse, known someone that people now fear, whose name dare not be spoken? This is the story about Matt and his one golden rule. Back when I was younger, barely a teenager, my friends and I thrived off of horror stories. Ghost stories, legends, pretty much anything really to get a true scare. We would ghost hunt. Childish, I suppose, but after all, I was a child. My friends and I would research horrible, gruesome, and disturbing stories. Stories of insane psychopaths with a taste for blood. No, really, some actually drank blood. Stories of humble families in the wrong place at the wrong time. Stories of darkness that could swallow the brightest light. Stories of evil. Raw, unrefined evil. One dark night, you may think, how typical, but in my defense it was 1:30 in the morning. The bleak and ominous clouds that loomed overhead seemed different tonight somehow, as if the joy from the world was drained, and the clouds that loomed above were the shattered remains of happiness and hope. I remember feeling a bit of remorse until that was washed out by a sharp, intense pain on the back of my head. I turned in a rush to face whatever had hit me,
Snap out of it, weirdo.
said a familiar, trustworthy voice. Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was you. Leo, one of my longtime friends, standing with a grin that seemed almost too wide for his face.
We found a killer place, man. Totally morbid. And the guys are waiting on us.
He motioned to me to follow, as he began to walk down the dark road. As I followed, I began to notice certain things happening. I could hear the rustle of the leaves that barely gripped the limbs of the trees. My hands felt cold and clammy, as if I had been holding onto a ledge for dear life. My heart thudded with each step I took, almost in unison. The sound of my heartbeat grew louder and louder, so loud in fact, I wasn't sure if the sound could just be coming from my chest. Can you hear that? I asked Leo. He didn't respond to my question, he just kept walking. The most peculiar thing I had noticed was the clouds. I realized that normally the sight of them would have just been waved off, though they seemed to follow me. My heart started to beat faster as I increased my pace. When my gaze fell from the sky and down to my surroundings, I stopped. And to my horror, I couldn't hear Leo's footsteps. Slightly shaken, I spoke out. Leo, which way did you go? I shut my mouth tightly in order to hear a response. I closed my eyes. I figured the loss of one sense could increase the others, right? I couldn't hear anything. Not even the wind. A strange yet welcome calmness fell around me. Nothing I had ever felt before. I don't remember how it made me feel exactly, but I grinned for some reason. Almost as if I had finally had what others described as peace and quiet. My rational thinking quickly overcame the sudden stillness. I opened my eyes and peered around once more. Through the darkness of the night, I could make out the streets, lined with some abandoned houses and random debris. Though, the yards were not a strange sight to me. I've seen wreckage my whole life. Nothing new here. That was until I saw them. Those clouds. As if they never left my side. As if they were to comfort me. As if they were to protect me from something. Then I felt a stinging pain on the back of my head. Turning around almost as a reflex, I saw Leo. He looked at me with a slight smile and told me to
Snap out of it, weirdo.
Leo? Where'd you go? I asked, in a concern of why he left me alone. He paused and gave me a bewildered expression with a slight shrug.
We found a killer place, man. Totally morbid.
Before he could finish, I took a step back. The guys are waiting on us, I said under my own breath.
Come on, the guys are waiting on us.
He said before motioning me to follow him. I took a small step after him. Then I realized where I was. I was back in the same spot as before. Nothing had changed. Not even the clouds. I moved quickly and kept alongside him to make sure he wouldn't trick me again. I began to wonder, deja vu? Whatever, I thought to myself. I walked with him, and we came to what appeared to be a factory of sorts. Smokestacks raised high off the building, as if to pierce the night sky. But to my fear, when I saw the smokestacks, those clouds that I had once felt a sort of safety, now felt more colder, more ominous. We made our way into the fenced-off area where Adam stood, leaning against the entrance. Next to Adam was Corey. He was a quiet kid by nature. Frankly, I was surprised he showed up at all.
Well, it's about time,
Adam said aloud as we approached him.
Sorry, this guy was daydreaming again.
Leo said with a slight chuckle. His laugh echoed in my ears, causing a ringing sound that almost crippled me. I fell to my knees and held my ears.
Hey man, are you alright?
Leo offered a hand to me. I stood up and looked at my hands that once protected my ears. Blood? I said to myself, my ears are bleeding? I quickly wiped off the red liquid that stained my hands and looked over to Adam. Adam leaned forward and took a few steps towards me before turning and facing the factory.
Do you know the story of the shadow?
He whispered to us.
You mean the one about the kid who was brutally tortured here?
Adam then nodded and continued speaking. As his lips moved, I could barely make out what he was saying. Red, dark blood, ears? He then looked at me with a slight grin upon his face, although his grin looked twisted as if he had a spooky trick up his sleeve. I ignored it. I was far more concerned with my condition. I mean, my ears were bleeding. Shaking my head slightly, my hearing slowly recovered.
He's in there, exploring.
Adam said before walking into the blackness. I remembered how dark it was to walk through those doors. It looked as if a wall, painted black, was directly in my path. I heard footsteps in front of and behind me. A sigh of relief was truly called for, knowing I could trust my friends by my side. We began to explore. Oh, what a difficult word, explore. Meaning to seek the unknown without fear. At least. Until the fear presents itself, anyway. We began to search, though nothing was truly visible. It seemed just random rubble and debris littered the floor of this dank and dreary location. I can't explain it, even to this day, but one word randomly popped into my head. Why? Not why as in why is this place here, or why is this factory abandoned? The why as in, why hasn't anyone torn this place down? My mind began to wonder. There has to be a reason why no one comes here. Why it still stands as a factory, rather than one of those fancy modern shopping malls. The questions raised, as if they were injected into my brain. The thoughts were overwhelming, enough so that I eventually collapsed to my knees and my breath grew short. Thankfully, a noise struck me back to consciousness. It sounded like a gasp, but not a normal shock and awe type of gasp. This one felt dark, as if it was the last gasp of a dying animal. I looked up, seeing Leo still searching around with his flashlight. I was assured I couldn't have been the only one to hear that noise. "Hey, Leo," I said in a hushed tone. "Did you hear that sound?" Without turning around to face me while he searched.
What sound?
Never mind, I said before turning back towards the noise. Taking a short step, my foot snagged on something heavy. As I knelt down, the image came into focus. Fabric? It was far too dark to make out any of the features of this heavy object that was placed on the floor. My curiosity began to take over my body. I began tapping on the object I snagged my foot on, a light pat, to help me to see what was clearly in front of me. As my hands further explored this shrouded thing, it felt warm as I rested my hand on the center mass of the object. My hands began to feel clammy once more. I was simply freaking myself out, I thought, as I rose to my feet and walked back to Leo. Turning, he looked at me in a concerned and confused manner, almost as if he had just seen a ghost.
Get back!
He said in a very angered tone, a tone of a desperate man, someone struck with a pure sense of dread. "Leo, it's me," I said in an attempt to plead with him. I shook my head as my hand rested upon my cheek. None of this is making any sense. Leo dropped his flashlight and took off into the darkness. He looked to be fleeing. His footsteps grew fainter and fainter until all the sound was drowned out by the scream. Then nothing. No movement. No sound. Just an obscure stillness. Terrified, I hesitantly picked up the flashlight and looked down at my hand. It looked like blood or something was all over me, dripping from my fingertips. After my hand left my attention, the only thing that was left in my view, I jumped at the sight. As I stumbled back a few steps, but keeping the light fixed on the object I was previously tapping, "Adam?" left my lips, almost as a hopeless whisper. His lower jaw had been removed by something, almost like something grabbed and ripped his lower jaw clear off with their bare hands. Dizzy, and now nauseous, I held my stomach, trying to find an exit in this factory. It was difficult, but I could make out a doorframe in the distance. Though, just before I left the door, I heard a repeating whisper over and over. "I'll keep quiet, I promise." Almost as if a person was chanting. I should have left. I knew in my very gut things here are bad, but if one person is still here, I have to try and help them. Venturing back into the darkness with the flashlight in hand, I saw a figure moving back and forth, almost swaying. "Leo?" I said to the dark swaying figure. A slightly muffled laugh was heard. "Leo is dead. All dead. He wasn't quiet." Taking a step towards the shadow, ignoring what he said, I replied, "Come on, we have to get out of here." He never moved, simply replied, No, I have to stay here. Stay quiet. I'll keep quiet, I promise," he said in a confident yet nervous tone. "Who told you to keep quiet?" As I moved closer, I realized that it was Corey. He stopped swaying back and forth, rose to his feet but didn't answer. "I'm just saying I could hear you from across the room," I said in a shaky voice. "Please, let me help you." I attempted to reason with Corey, but he just stood there, motionless. Soundless. I remember feeling that silence. That silence from before, the peace and quiet. A voice brought me back. "Are you really going to help me? I stayed quiet for you." Once the voice broke the silence, I looked around for Corey, who was right in front of me. I couldn't see him, or a shadow of him for that matter. I turned around and felt a tug on my right foot. Looking down, something was grasping onto me. As I knelt down, I noticed something that made me turn pale. I coughed and saw the lifeless face of Corey. I shined the flashlight on his face and noticed something that almost caused me to vomit. His throat was crushed, almost as if he had never had a neck to connect his head to his body. It was just flattened skin. Jumping back, I began to run frantically. I've never ran faster in my life. Just before I jumped through the door, I heard a very faint, very distinct whisper. "Be quiet." I was frozen with fear. I wanted to think about anything else. Anything but the voice. Then, I thought about the clouds. I was suddenly brought back to the factory by a coughing, gurgling noise. It sounded horrific, like a person being choked to death. I rushed towards the sound through the darkness, my flashlight flailing about until I ran into a large object in front of me, knocking me to the ground. Immediately, I shined my light on the object. It was a mirror. Now the fear slowly seeped into every part of me. "Hello?" I asked, checking to my left and to my right. Nothing replied. I stood up, backing away slowly away from the mirror. I felt something bump into me. I instantly screamed, then covered my mouth. As I turned around, I was peering into the lifeless eyes of Leo. Oh God. My God. His body was suspended from the ceiling. By his neck. I noticed Leo's mouth was sewn together and bleeding. I couldn't look away. These were my best friends. I just didn't know what to do. I noticed my heart beating again. It was quiet and weak, but I could hear it. The voice returned. "Be quiet." I kept my mouth shut, fearful of making the slightest noise. The voice started to grow louder over my right shoulder. "Be quiet." I knew I wasn't making any sound. Then I began to think. Could this thing hear my heartbeat? I stood paralyzed, too scared to run for the door, for fear I would make noise, then whatever had killed my friends would find me. A moment of silence passed by. It felt like an eternity. I felt breathing on my neck. A voice that sounded inches away from my ear whispered, "Be quiet." Just then, I took off running, not caring where I was going, just away from that voice. That's all I knew. The wind seemed to be sliced in half by my desire to escape. I shut my eyes as I ran through the main factory door, and when I opened my eyes, I was in the middle of the street, panting heavily and trying to gather myself. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. My heartbeat slowed. and the whistle of the wind stopped. Almost as if nature itself was asked to please be quiet. The calm, relaxing feeling overcame me, and I began to smile. All the carnage and gore I had just experienced melted away. Suddenly, I felt a very sharp pain on the back of my head. Snapping out of my sudden calmness, I turned.
Hey, Matt! Snap out of it, weirdo. We found a killer place, man. Totally morbid. The guys are waiting on us.
I looked up with a sharp glare. We shouldn't keep them waiting, I replied to Leo, as we walked towards the factory.